son of Ashes. Part 2. The Hollow Woods. Return to Duskbrook. The wagon creaked back into Duskbrook under a bruised sky. Lanterns along the mud-slick street swayed in a sickly wind, their oil burning low, sputtering like dying stars. The villagers were waiting before the weeping tankard, faces pale and desperate. Some held pitchforks, others rosaries made of ashwood beads. The fear in their eyes was not of the hunters, but of the forest. "You're back from the manor then," croaked an old man with a missing hand. "Please, hear us. We need your help. The goblins are taking our young. They scream in the dark, and no one ever comes back." A woman stepped forward, clutching a small pouch of silver pennies, no more than a few days' wages for all of them combined. "It's all we have," she said, voice trembling. "If you'll help us, we'll owe you our prayers." What little weight they still hold. Cain exhaled through his nose, a long, weary breath. He bit back the words forming behind his teeth. Disdain for prayers offered to powers he believed long dead. Faith wasted on gods who had already turned their faces from man. There was murmuring, half hope, half shame. Before Edrin could speak, Warden Lyra Vance stepped from the shadows near the inn, cloak drawn close, longbow slung across her shoulder. "There's no need for begging," Lyra said, her voice low but steady. "I'll guide them, if they'll have me." For a moment, the wind carried nothing but the creak of the wagon and the soft hiss of rain against lantern glass. Edrin looked at her, measuring the fatigue in her eyes, the same weight he saw in his own reflection every morning. "Then we move at once," he said. "The dark doesn't wait, and neither will we." Cain shifted beside him, jaw tightening. He opened his mouth as if to speak, a bitter remark forming about wasted prayers and hopeless causes, but stopped. Near the inn steps, a mother knelt in the mud, clutching a small boot, the other half of a pair lost to the forest. Her shoulders shook in silence. Cain's words died on his tongue. He turned away, hiding his face beneath the hood of his cloak. "So be it," he muttered. "Let's end this before the woods claim another child." Lyra nodded once, her hand tightening on the worn grip of her bow. "Then it's settled," she said quietly. "The Hollow Woods will have their reckoning." Into the woods. The forest east of Duskbrook was once called Velcroft. Locals now whisper it as the Hollow Woods, where sound dies faster than it should, and the fog smells faintly of decay. Their lantern lights stretch thin between trees twisted into grotesque shapes, bark flaking like burned skin. Old offerings, bits of flesh and bone, hung from the branches. Horrid sights to behold, limbs half gnawed by the black-hearted creatures, left strewn across the forest floor. Faint symbols marked the trees and stones, runes carved into wood, rock, and dirt, their shapes pulsing with the residue of foul magic. Thaddeus crouched, the light from his lantern casting warped reflections across the gore. "Alchemical residue," he muttered. "Sulfur and bile. Have you ever seen goblins work rituals like this?" "No," came Edrin's voice, slow and cold. "There's something else at work here." Cain knelt beside a mark carved into the soil, a spiral within a jagged circle, still damp with blackened blood. His eyes narrowed. "Demonic script," he said. "Old. They've been taught." Edrin's reply was almost a whisper. Taught, or being controlled. The trail wound into a clearing where the forest fell away to ruin. Half-buried stones jutted like broken teeth, etched with runes long before the Eclipse. From their edges hung bones bound in hair and sinew. The work of goblins, yes, but guided by something far crueler. Lyra's voice was little more than breath. These markings, they're summoning wards. But not goblin work. Not really. Kane traced one with a gloved finger, the symbol still warm to the touch. Possession, he murmured. A demon's hand moves through them. It's searching for something. A vessel, maybe a child. Thaddeus stepped toward a patch of brush and raised his lantern, its glow trembling across what lay beyond. 3 goblins, shriveled and eyeless, their skin drawn taut like parchment. He crouched, tracing the blackened veins that webbed their flesh. These weren't slain by their master, he murmured. They were emptied. Something else fed here. Edrin's gaze drifted to the tree line. The Morgal, he said. It doesn't serve the demon. It just feasts where the veil's already thin. As if to answer, the lantern light faltered, shadows deepening around the withered corpses. The black hollows where eyes had been began to stir, spilling smoke that crawled across the earth. Kane's tone turned grim. He used their deaths as kindling. The smoke thickened, shaping into lean, silent forms, shadows in the shape of large hounds, their breath cold as the grave. The Morgal's touch, Edrin said, readying his blade. It's close. Behind them, a darker outline stood. Tall, still, faceless, the Morgal itself watching through the veil. Grail growled low. It's here. Edrin raised his firearm. No, it's watching. The hounds are its teeth. The first hound came through the fog like a knife through cloth, silent until its jaws closed around the air, where Edrin had stood a heartbeat earlier. He rolled aside, steel flashing as his blade carved through its neck. The creature split in half, dissolving into smoke that screamed as it scattered. Another lunged at Lyra from the flank. She loosed an arrow point blank. It passed through the thing's ribs and burst into black mist, but its momentum threw her backward into the mud. She hit the ground hard, the lantern light strobing with every breath. Thaddeus hurled a vial into the pack. Glass shattered, and a wave of alchemical fire rippled across the clearing, turning the mist into a living inferno. The hounds writhed in the flames but did not burn. They twisted, forming new bodies from shadow just beyond the fire's edge. Kane raised his hand, muttering a curse that froze the ground beneath them. The nearest beast faltered, its form shuddering as black ice crawled up its legs, before Edrin's sword shattered it with a single stroke. For a moment the clearing was chaos, steel and fire flashing against darkness, the air thick with ash and whispers. Then, as the last hound fell, it dissolved into smoke and screams that echoed too long, like the sound refused to die. Across the ruin, the Morgal's cloaked silhouette lingered, tall and still, its head tilting in quiet mockery. Where eyes should have been, only empty sockets remained, black voids that devoured the lantern light until nothing shone upon its face. It stood for a breath, motionless, then turned away and vanished into the shadow, leaving the reek of cold metal and grief hanging in its wake. Lyra stood in silence, bow lowered, watching the last trace of darkness fade. "A test?" she asked, voice unsteady. Edrin sheathed his blade, the edge still whispering smoke. "Aye," he said. "It wanted to see how bright our light burns, before it decides to snuff it out." Tracking the goblins. Following the black spore deeper in, the forest floor turned soft beneath their boots, slick with blood and decay. Sickly mushrooms clustered along the roots, feeding on the rot, their pale caps trembling in the lantern light. They found goblin totems, small skulls split open and filled with flickering embers. Some bore demonic sigils. They came upon a grove of crude totems, bones lashed to poles, skulls bound with strips of flesh and hair. The lantern light revealed hollow sockets staring back, and in their shapes Lyra saw something horribly familiar. "These?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Gods, they're from the village." As she looked at the skulls, she turned away, jaw tightening, as she fought the wave of nausea. "They took them, the ones we never found." Kane stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he traced a series of runes carved into the wood, their grooves still warm to the touch and oozing a dark resin. "Abyssal," he muttered. "I can read part of it." He leaned in, voice low, as if the words themselves might hear. "Let his path be lit with blackened flame, that he may walk again." Lyra looked at him, eyes wide. "What does it mean?" Kane's expression darkened. "It's a summoning prayer. The demon isn't just feeding on them. It's searching for a vessel, something to anchor it here." The lanterns flickered, their flames shivering in unison, as though the forest itself had heard and approved. Grail glanced over his shoulder, hand tightening on his axe, eyes scanning the dark as if expecting the Morgal's hollow gaze to return. Edrin caught the look and shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. "That was a test, to see our strength." His true prey waits back at the lodge. Signs of dragged bodies led deeper into the forest, where the trees began to thin. Through the mist, shapes emerged. The crumbling outline of an old temple, its stone walls half swallowed by roots and time. Faded carvings lined the broken archway, their meaning long lost, though faint red light bled through the cracks like veins beneath old skin. The stench of corruption hung thick in the air, sour and metallic, as if the ground itself had turned against life. The old temple. The forest thinned to broken stone and the remnants of an old temple, its pillars half swallowed by roots. Lantern light spilled across the steps, cracked, blood-slicked, and littered with bones. Lyra froze, hand rising for silence. From within came the hiss of guttural chanting. A dozen voices tangled in one discordant rhythm. Then, movement. "Ambush!" Edrin barked, drawing steel. Arrows hissed from the shadows. Grail caught one in his shoulder, snarling as he charged the steps. Edrin met another goblin mid-leap, his blade flashing in the lantern light. One clean stroke, and the creature fell in two. Lyra's bow sang beside him, arrows thudding into the dark. "More inside!" she shouted. They stormed the broken doorway and entered the ruined temple, where old carvings glowed faintly red beneath a film of grime. The air stank of rot and incense. Bones and hides hung from the rafters, forming a grotesque shrine around a central altar slick with blood. At its heart writhed a goblin shaman, eyes burning crimson, bones clattering on his staff as he howled to unseen gods. Each time his chant rose, the dead twitched, and the fallen began to stir. "By the light," Lyra whispered. The corpses convulsed, their limbs cracking and lengthening, flesh blackening, until they no longer resembled goblins at all. "Stop the ritual!" Lyra shouted. "Break his focus!" "On it!" Edrin roared, as claws found the flesh of his thigh. He ripped away, cleaving the risen fiend in half. Kane's hand flashed out, runes of shadow swirling around his fingers. "By the hollow word and dying flame," he hissed, "let silence take your breath." His curse struck a creature mid-charge, freezing it before it shattered into ash. Thaddeus hurled a vial into the mob. Fire erupted, spilling across the floor. The floor trembled. From deeper within the temple came a roar, a sound too large for anything mortal. The walls shook as a massive abomination lurched into view, stitched from corpses and swollen with demonic ichor, its eyes burning with stolen flame. "Gods," Lyra whispered, drawing another arrow. "They won't help," Grail said grimly. "We do this ourselves." The creature charged, smashing through the pillars. Grail met it head-on, but was knocked aside into a group of goblins. Then came the whisper, not from one throat, but from every goblin voice in the temple, all speaking as one. Finish the summoning, now. Thaddeus looked toward the back of the hall and felt the blood drain from his face. The altar. There's a child. He's the vessel. Through the smoke, he saw the shaman standing before the shrine, holding a knife above the small body, bound in ritual markings. Blood dripped from his palm into a basin as the chanting grew wild. Edrin's eyes went cold. He mounted his spectral steed in one fluid motion, its hooves blazing with pale fire. "Hold the line," he shouted. "I'll end this." He spurred forward through fire and shrieking goblins, sword flashing. The shaman turned, howling, and plunged his clawed hand into the basin just as Edrin's blade struck. Steel split flesh. The shaman fell, but the blood ignited. A roar shook the hall as the demon forced itself into the dying body, desperate for any vessel. The corpse split and twisted, horns tearing through its skull as the creature rose anew. A half-born thing of smoke and bone, held together by will alone. Cain's eyes widened. It failed to take the child, but it's still trying to manifest. "You do not belong here," Edrin shouted at the half-formed demon as he clashed with it. Sparks rained from the clash of steel and claw. The fight became chaos. Lyra's arrows slamming into the abomination, Cain's curses hissing through the air, Thaddeus's alchemical fire turning shadows into waves of red heat. Grail regained his footing, cleaving through the horde he'd crashed into, his great axe spraying a storm of blood and black ichor across the stone. Thaddeus, driven back and bleeding, reached for the crimson vial at his belt. The abomination loomed closer, its breath hot and rancid. He didn't hesitate. He tore the cork free. "No other choice," he hissed. He uncorked it and drank. His veins flared red beneath his skin, his muscles convulsed as bones cracked and stretched. In moments, the alchemist was gone, replaced by a monster of sinew and steam. He met the abomination in a thunderous clash near the shattered doorway, their collision shaking the temple walls. Claw met flesh in a frenzy of rage and power, the two brutes tearing into one another with deafening roars. Thaddeus fought like a cornered beast, his claws ripping through sinew, his blows cracking bone. Each strike drove the abomination back a step, leaving streaks of blackened blood across the broken floor. At the altar, Edrin struck again and again, driving the demon back until Cain's final spell, a word of unmaking, tore from his throat. Black fire swallowed the shaman's corpse, the demon screaming as its half-formed body was dragged back into the void. Grail found an opening as the abomination reared back, its bulk twisting to strike at Thaddeus. He stepped through the swing, driving his great axe low, and with a roar, the blade found its way home between the creature's spine and heart. The beast convulsed, black ichor spraying in thick arcs before it collapsed in a trembling heap. The sound of its death rolled through the temple like thunder fading into silence. Thaddeus stood over it, chest heaving, claws slick with blood. For a heartbeat he was still. Then his eyes flared, wild and burning. The veins in his neck bulged as he turned toward Grail, teeth bared in something not quite human. Grail lifted his axe, meeting his gaze. "Don't." Thaddeus took one step forward, then stumbled. A strangled growl escaped his throat as his body shuddered, muscles twisting in pain before collapsing to his knees. The monstrous frame began to shrink, steam hissing from his skin as the change reversed. He sagged forward, coughing red mist, the madness fading from his eyes. "I had it," he rasped. "I had control." Edrin stood over the fallen altar, blood-streaked sword in hand. He knelt and cut the bindings from the unconscious child. "He's breathing," he said softly. The vessel's safe. Kane wiped the ash from his hands, eyes still glowing faintly. Safe, for now. Then we're done here, Lyra said, her voice shaking. Let's get him home. The hunters left the temple as the sun's pale light broke through the trees, dimly lighting the ruins. Behind them, the old stones smoked, and the last embers of the demon's fire bled away into the earth. Aftermath. By the time they reached Duskbrook, the sky was paling with the color of worn steel. Word of their return spread quickly, and soon the villagers gathered in the square, faces drawn and hollow, hope and grief entwined. Relief met them first, but it died quickly when they saw the bundle in Edrin's arms. Only one child had survived. The rest were lost to the forest. Mothers wept quietly. Fathers stood in silence, the sound of sobbing echoing between the shuttered homes. You brought one back, the elder finally said, voice raw. That's more than the dark usually leaves behind. They were paid in what meager coin the town could spare. A few trinkets, bandages, dried food, and worn travel gear. Gratitude came not as cheers, but bowed heads and trembling hands. Then an old man stepped forward from the crowd, his cloak patched and thin. He held out a lantern of blackened brass, its glass etched with faint runes that shimmered when touched by light. Found it years ago in the marsh ruins, he said, his eyes distant. It still burns when others die out. Never seen the flame go cold after you light it. Edrin accepted it with a solemn nod. The lantern's glow was faint but steady, a single point of light refusing to fade. As they turned to leave, smoke from the forest drifted along the horizon, dull and grey against the morning mist. Lyra looked back once, her voice little more than breath. We saved one, out of so many. Edrin's voice was steady, but carried the weight of exhaustion and truth. We made it pay for the innocence that was lost, he said. It was all that could be done. You now have an opportunity to rebuild. He turned slightly, the lantern's light flickering across his armor. Keep the lanterns burning bright.